Now I want to talk about where this went. And it went in a couple of directions. One kind of took the ordering by dexterity. So the numbers are the numbers, and there's no roll involved for that. You just look at fastest, and you go in that order. There you go. That turned into a whole trajectory of combat game design, probably the most famous being Champions, which uses a speed chart for sort of subunits of rounds for faster people get more of those rounds to be in. But then within each round, or it's called phases in Champions, within each phase, then you go by dexterity. And it's a very similar game. It uses hexes, and it's very clearly derived. The rest of it's very clearly derived straight from melee options and all. And they also decoupled, no, I should say it again, they recoupled movement and actions. So now you have the infamous freeze frame problem where the character is frozen until their turn comes. Then they do all the movement, and then they do all, and in that same player activity, carry out the action. So they even announce their action at that point. Okay, to use my terminology, back in Melee, what you had was intent as stated by a given player for all the figures before anything happens. And that's fixed. There's no change in that. Intent's done. And we know what all your figures are up to. Then, carrying out the movement part for all those figures is a fairly formal application of what I call initiation. They have started to do what they were going to do, and they get as far as the movement aspect of it, but they don't execute it yet. So intent is stated, movement is conducted, initiation is conducted, and those were ruled per person for the figures per person by the initiative dice. Then, which by the way have no connection whatsoever to the figure's actual qualities. I don't care if those characters are like fast or something. It's just a d6 roll. We're done. Then we have execution, which is carried out by the in the order of adjusted dexterity, and then effect goes immediately upon execution. There's a damage roll, and you check it with armor and stuff like that. That's how it works. So we go to Champions, and we retain all of that. In fact, quite a bit of it in terms of the specific details. But we remove the die of initiative. It's gone. Instead, we've got the speed chart, and so that's going to tell us who's going to get a few more moves than someone else. But then you have sort of an interesting situation. Your power says you go this fast, miles per hour, basically. And yet, if you have a speed of 2, and therefore you're going on phases 6 and 12, okay, granted, if you get to go on it, it's called your phase. The generic term is segment. I hear you out there, Hero Games people. I know. Okay, so you have speed of 2, so you get your phases are therefore segments 6 and 12 out of 12. So if you do a full move on each of those, then you're going to get double that miles per hour as your full move for that whole round. And someone else with a higher speed who does 4 segments with the same movement power. See what I mean? I mean, things start to get a little weird. But that aside, something weirder happens. Because when it comes to you in Champions and in tons of games based on it, you are free as a bird. You don't have any intent, initiation, execution, effect stated at all. You've been in the nth dimension as far as your own activity, your own proactivity is concerned until this moment when you get to go. And so then you can do like your full movement. Now, what's lost, of course, in all of this, as is well known to all players of things like Car Wars and anything which is a related game, and all these other things, is momentum. What happens if you do a full move on this phase, and then the next phase that you can move, you continue your full move? In other words, you're blazing along to go from here to over there. Well, in that dead time between your two phases when other people get to go, what if somebody's targeting you? Are you moving or are you not moving? If you're not moving, then why don't you just fall down like a stone and hit the ground, right? I mean, and this is what happens when the segments themselves are treated as an in-fiction metronome of time, which was not the case in Melee. So you see, now we flipped it. Now the timing of it all is set by the structure. And if your whole IIEE are contained in your turn when it gets to you, then you have this strange business of everybody striking, their stasis pose while one individual gets to do a full action. It's like every single one of them suddenly is in a museum full of statues and runs around doing what they're going to do. And then they freeze, and the next one sort of, gets activated. And so momentum and a variety of other arguably reasonable effects of, objects moving in space become strange. So that's what goes on in the champion situation. And the reason I mention it is not just because of some of its peccadillos, but that specific one of shifting from retroactive time and explanation into, and also the decoupling of initiation and execution in Melee into completely different mechanics. And yet in Champions, now we're squishing IIEE together. So this is, well, hard to play. And then you have the other phenomenon, which is to retain the initiative die, which sort of creeps into the D&D rules in kind of odd little ways. And then that sets the order, but it's treated more like the Champions thing, in which everybody's frozen until it's their turn. So you see, both of these are an interesting, one goes with the order of dexterity and one goes with the die, those two components in the Melee system, but each of them completely change up the fundamental context, which is that now each little unit is a separate and sequential bit of fictional time. This sort of becomes codified into role-playing, that your character has either a score or a role modified by a score, that's going to set your order, your place in the order. And when it comes to your turn in the order, you've done nothing since the end of your last turn, and you have a sudden full complement of all your movement and all of your action options and all the way you parse that to do in freedom. So if you take the mechanizing of the procedure as the literal depiction of what is being decided and done in time, then the fictional space, the fictional phenomena of this battle or confrontation is blither. I mean, it is really, really not fictionally acceptable, or very close to. And I'll talk about how you deal with a system which could be any of these things that basically have the freeze frame and then the full range of options and intent just starting up out of nowhere. The next question is, what does the mapping have to do with it? The answer is not really that much, but the mapping has a way of making you stop in a particular spot or continue into another spot that's maybe further than you want to go. It might be as arbitrary as just having laid a grid down over a picture, and for whatever reason, it is prohibited for you to have 1 foot on one side of the line and 1 foot on the other side of the line, of the fact that this map was just kind of laid down effectively at random. onto the map. So that's kind of where the maps can be involved, particularly when the round is short. I mean, like really short. So therefore you're kind of going, well, if my action is taking place in just these few seconds, I mean, for 1 second, I mean, I could be on like straddling the hex line, right? The square. I mean, right? I mean, what's wrong with that? Or as Tommy was pointing out, all kinds of issues of, your horse is galloping along. Does that mean that, your turn is over? Now you're frozen and then they get to gallop as far as they go. And you get kind of these classical Greek, debate on the nature of time and motion. Well, with all of this happening, then we have to consider, what do you do? Frankly, the melee method was lost, and you're dealing with individual sequencing and full complement of options and movement per individual action, and each one is considered to take place fully and be completed before the next person sort of activates and begins their entire thing. So whether you get there with a dice roll, whether you re-roll that ordering every round, or whether you're going by various scores and you just go in those orderings or whatever, that's the phenomenon of interest. How do you cope with that? Well, I can speak very much so for Champions and a number of other games of the time. There's 3 solutions, all of which are applied ad lib through play without really anybody admitting it. One is simply to avoid going places or stating actions that would be difficult. Don't say, well, I'd like to end up, right on the line between these 2 hexes. Just don't do it. Just go to one or the other. I know there's no earthly fictional reason why your character can't, be in the exact spot right there, but we're going to kind of say they are, or better yet, for purposes of avoiding, just don't do it. It's sort of a black hole of can't do, that as long as we don't mention that you can't do it, no one will notice, and we won't notice. The best way to look at that is in cinema, for it to be impossible to depict a thing in a particular way that fictionally would be great to depict and would make sense to depict or happen. And you just can't. 10,000 reasons. Film stuff, camera tech, other effects, possibilities, the vagaries of, actors' moods. I mean, who knows what? I mean, the fact that the set, if you move the camera here, you'll see the edge of the set, right? And all of a sudden, you're out of the Sahara and in the sound studio. Thousands and thousands of things that just say, nope, you're just not going to get that shot from that angle with them being able to do that. Not going to happen. Or the fact that, the prop doesn't work, or, the prop shark, to pick a real world example, just doesn't look good. So you can't. So it's exactly the same. You don't do what you can't do. And the fiction operates within those constraints. And as long as the fiction is operating within those, you're not worrying about what didn't happen. You didn't go there. And it doesn't happen. So what's the problem? That's one way. And it's actually surprisingly effective. That's only one of the solutions, though. Avoidance. The other one is eliding, which is slightly different, where you do get it to do it the way that you want to, and the various technologies, the instrumentation or the procedures aren't really obeying, but that's kind of where you retroactively retool it based on what they could do. So you follow the rules to do the thing. You can go to that hex, but not in between the 2 hexes or whatever it may be. Or you do, go full tilt, zoom, full speed there. And then the next, phase that you act, you're looking in the book. Right. So, how'd you stop? So anyway, there's all these things, and you go ahead and do them. But we're all just going to imagine in retrospect that in sort of the gray zone between the end of your previous phase and the beginning of this one, you slowed down. We got to look at you in kind of flying slow down position. I mean, if you think of the old Superman, I mean, when he's landing, from one, he actually looks like he's running on solid ground with his foot stuck out in front, with his toes turned up. So it's like he's skidding on air, right, to slow himself down. So we sort of, whatever pose works for your character's flight power, we are going to imagine that you kind of went into that. You said full blast to get over to that hex. And we all imagine it. Okay, next hex, you're saying, okay, now I'm looking through that book that I got to. And we kind of all imagine it as, okay, in the last part of your full move, you slowed yourself down, just enough time to pick up the book and start leaving. We just do that. And if it so happens that, this particular attack puts you in a position of advantage for a bonus of going over there, but in the fiction, it sort of wasn't quite what you were going to do, or it wouldn't quite apply in some way. But hey, the positioning on the map and the positioning of the timing gave it to you. I mean, come on. He had like 4 phases to turn around and notice you, right? 4 segments or whatever in which he could turn around and notice you. And he didn't. No, the way that the game and the perception rolls and everything worked, you're over there for all these segments and, he's not going to see you. Just deal. Again, cinematography comes to our rescue. Thinking about the fact that the way that fictional time works is, if you'll excuse the expression, the cinematographer's bitch in collusion with the editor. That how did you have time to sneak up like that? And you loom up behind the guy and, bonk him and go, wait a minute, wasn't he? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. The cool thing is when you loomed up behind him and bonked him, we go, ooh, okay, there. That ooh covers a multitude of logistic in-fiction sins. And it works like that for all media regarding fictional activity. So if it works for literature and it works for cinematography and it can work for us, and we don't have to hide our faces in shame over that. So that's eliding, avoiding first, and then this one is eliding, usually with a little retroactive, justification or imaginative stuff. And then finally, the third is basically just breaking and saying, screw it. Just screw it. Yeah, it says you can't. You can. You are standing there with 1 foot here and 1 foot there on the map. Whatever. And whatever constraint that introduces that is arbitrary because that's where the little hex line fell, screw it. It's not going to apply. Just break it. Just say the rules as written, the procedures that we're following in this little kind of flash frame moment of your character's activity, balls. You don't get the penalty on that roll, or you do get the bonus to that roll, or you don't get the bonus to that roll, or whatever it is, fine. Or a good example too is like, okay, your character, executes this turn and, we're all going, wouldn't we all like this comic better if he really kind of had to worry about slamming into that wall that he just, pulled that, that pinwheel, that U-turn at? And we all kind of look at each other and the GM says, make an athletics check on that one. And everybody's fine with it. The player's happier too. He's like, oh, yeah, you know what? I'm actually kind of happier if I miss this roll and slam into the wall while trying to make that turn. I'm not going to like that turn unless we make that check. Fail or pass. Now, later rules in Champions, like some of the supplemental rules, tried to put in subroutines about all these things about sharp turns and momentum and stuff like that. And it's a nightmare. I mean, it is just a nightmare of little subroutines that I, in many, many years of playing Champions with many, many people, never saw anyone implement once. Instead, at moments like that, just break it and say, let's throw that roll in this time. That's your kind of guy, Set athletics and champions its acrobatics for that purpose. Well, anyway, are you seeing my point? Avoiding, eliding, breaking. Sins, terrible, bad game design, bad play, horseshit. It's what you do with a creative medium concerning fictional activity. So you would use any such system when the things that it does permit or organize or contribute, to the fictional activity are things you like, period. And that you don't reject it because in these various little nooks and crannies and moments, even if regularly, don't make sense. Nope. It means that a given role-playing game and a given system is going to have certain experiential angles or modes of experience that's unique to it, that is, in fact, arbitrary, that is, in fact, ungovernable. In this, role-playing would be no different from any other art form, no other medium of fictional activity. And I say, vive la différence then, among the systems. There's no dreadful, nobody gives you a gold star because your little system doesn't have any such problem. Even though that was sort of, a dream. Just like there's this dream of camera and cinematographer people that they're going to, capture reality in their camera. And sooner or later they grow up and say, nah, that's not going to happen. I'm doing what the camera does do.